Well, we're back working on the Gardner Brothers Mill. We actually never left.
No.
But we're picking up this week right where we left off last week. Last week we were working on the boat dock.
Yes.
Now there's a fair amount of carpentry involved in the Gardner Brothers Mill. And so we've kind of split this into two shows. This is the boat dock and then the overhead walkway that goes up to the Millrace. All of this ties into the giant trestle, which is kind of part of the same wooden structure. So there's just a tremendous amount of woodwork here in the Big Canyon.
Right. I'm glad you have that logging railroad right above.
Yeah, the wood has to come from somewhere.
That's right.
But we want to keep all of this woodwork with the same look and feel all the way from the mill all the way clear to the top of the canyon, 11 feet above. And as we've mentioned before, the entire trestle and all the woodwork in the canyon is first stained with Watco Danish wood oil in dark walnut color. And so a lot of what you're seeing here on the giant trestle is just that without any additional weathering or other color applied. So as we were working on the boat dock from last week's video, we were careful to do the exact same treatment to stain all of this wood with the Watco dark walnut as a base color. And then coming back with our water-based acrylics and putting some lighter colors over the top of that and weathering effects and that sort of thing. And with a lot of these pieces, it's easiest to build them at the bench and then stain them once they're finished. But in some of these cases, especially in the case of the Millrace, there's no way to really do that, so it has to be stained in place as it's being built. It's necessary to have towels and rags and so on while you're staining to apply the stain and to keep the stain from getting all over the place. But it's critical to understand with these oils that they will self-combust. If you just leave these oily rags laying around your shop, you might burn your whole shop down. So make sure you get those things out to the trash at the end of the day. Now, the Millrace really shows over here on the left side. It's where the water cascades over onto the mill wheel, and it's just right there where everybody can see it.
Right.
But then it goes around behind the mill and then up between the cliff and the trestle over here where you almost can't see it at all.
Well, you wouldn't think, but you never know who can look.
Well, and we can see.
Yeah, I can see. Somebody that's 3 feet tall might be able to see.
And anyway, we don't build things necessarily to impress other people. We build things because it's fun.
Exactly. You know it's there, and I know it's there.
Well, anyway, it's just fun to make things fit into some sort of common sense real world.
Right.
And rather than have a mill race that just water comes from somewhere and then it runs over the end of the mill wheel. It doesn't just materialize.
No.
So even though my knees doth protest a little bit, this thing's being built entirely in place.
Yes, I walk around and it's like, oh, hey, you're down there.
Crawling around on the floor building a mill race.
Yes.
It's the only way I can think of to do it. So there's how the mill race is going together. I'm staining these larger elements, drilling holes in the cliff, and then shoving these beams into the cliff to support the mill race, and then building the mill race on top of the pre-stained supports. Now the mill race threads down behind the mill and then also behind the trestle. So as I'm building this, I have to constantly keep setting my structures in place to make sure that I've got adequate clearance. Here again, I'm doing all of these spacings metrically. It's just so much easier to figure out the exact spacing using metrics. I'm cutting out and test fitting everything and then staining it and then gluing it in place once it's stained. I'm building up the bottom of the mill race first, and then I'll come back and add the sides. Again, all of this has to be built in place. As I'm building the sides, it's the exact same technique. Cut everything out and test fit it first. Some of these pieces can even be glued in place and then stained, but I need to make sure that as I'm working, everything is stained. There's no coming back because it's difficult to get to these areas. Moreover, the Watco oil will attack the styrene foam that I'm using for scenery here. In some places, the stain won't take because there's glue there, and in those cases I don't really worry about it because I am going to come back with acrylic paint and add weathering. I'm constantly checking for dimensional accuracy and squareness and, above all, clearance so that I don't run myself into a problem. Now, every 20 millimeters or so, there's one of these supports. On the prototype, they keep everything square so the water pressure doesn't push the sides out. More importantly, they just look cool. But also at this point, I'm building them so that they're removable because I can't glue them in place until we get the water in there. Now, right here, there's going to be a ladder up to the Millrace, and then on top of these supports, there's going to be a walkway so that someone can walk down through here to the sluice gate and open and close the sluice gate. Moreover, again, it's all really tight clearances coming down through here, so I'm constantly double checking that this is going to work. But also, I think it looks really cool.
Well, I want to walk down through there because, when I was a kid, I would have.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, building models like this is like building a place you can sneak into without getting yelled at.
And when we were kids, it was very dangerous.
Oh, it's still dangerous, but yeah.
We didn't know it was dangerous, well, I knew it was dangerous. I just do it anyway.
I was just curious. I mean, curiosity, it got the better of me more than once.
But doesn't that look like some scary, wonderful place?
Oh, I'd be walking in it barefoot.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we build models.
Yes, all these little secret places, the little teeny areas you're not supposed to go.
And you can just put your imagination
yes.
into the scene and ride the train or climb the trestle or whatever you want to do.
Right.
It's just a wonderful, wonderful fantasy.
Yes, take your shoes off and have fun.
Now, I don't really have a way of getting water into my Millrace, but since it's a model railroad and you can just kind of make stuff up as you go along, for purposes of the Gardner Brothers Mill here, well, there's a pipe that just comes out of the side of the cliff and brings the water to the Millrace that way. Where does the pipe come from? I don't know. It's a pipe that comes out of the side of the cliff and brings water. Now, this whole end of the Millrace is going to be constructed at the bench because it's got the sluice gate in it. And so rather than trying to build it in place here, I'm test fitting everything and building up the basic structure so that it's removable. And then I can do the final construction of it over at the workbench and then just slide it in place once it's finished. The sluice gate itself is made out of a little piece of evergreen siding. I think that will work just fine for the little vertical piece that slides up and down on the sluice gate. And then the supports, the track for this, if you will, is just made out of more of these matchsticks. And then a few weeks ago when I was casting up a bunch of train parts, I always cast up tons and tons of extras, so I made up, I don't know, like 50 different 50 different brake wheels of different styles. And so I just picked one of those out, and that's going to be the wheel that operates the sluice gate. Now, I had thought about putting like a simulated threaded pattern on the rod here and try to make it look more like an actual functional wheel, but I think this looks pretty good, so I think it's perfect. When I was young, I used to say, oh, close enough is perfect. Now I like to say, oh, perfect is close enough. Anyway, I think it turned out really nice, and keeping in mind that no one will be able to see it anyway, it's tucked in behind the trestle where you can barely see unless you really twist your head around and peek.
So what's the hole in the side of the siding for?
Well, you see, the way I had to do some research, I got online. When you close the sluice gate, you don't want it to just overflow, so you have a hole in the side of the Millrace for the water to spill. It's a spillway.
Oh,
For when the sluice gate is closed.
okay.
And then the water will pour out there. In this case, just goes down along behind the trestle and back into the river.
Okay.
Anyway, now that everything is in place and stained, I'm coming back with my acrylic paints and adding something that looks like leaking water coming out and just general weathering and that sort of thing. I also like to add some very subtle greens soaked into the wood, like there's moss growing there or something. And keeping in mind that this is all back behind the trestle where you can barely see it, and there's going to be water on top of all of this, so it probably won't show at all, but it's still just fun to do.
Now, I have to admit I'm the biggest pack rat there ever was. I never throw anything away. I always think it has a future use. And in this case, it was the vinyl stick-on stuff from a bathroom window we had to cover to make it pass code in our apartment. And it was this vinyl stuff you buy at Home Depot, and it just clings in the window, but there was extra pieces left over. So I kept them, and I thought, this will come in handy for water. I just know it will work.
And one of the things I find interesting, the surface of it, while it looks ripply and looks like water, what really looks like water is when the light shines through it.
That's what I figured, because that's when the water looks the prettiest, is when light's shining through it.
Again, some research online, it's called caustics.
Oh, cool.
So when light travels through a ripply surface like water or rippled glass or something, it creates little focused areas of light, like lenses focusing light, and it's the light pattern that you're seeing that looks like water. When it's just laying flat like this, well, it's ripply, but it doesn't look that much like water. But if you get it up in the air so light shines through it and casts caustics onto the bottom, then wow, it suddenly looks like water.
It really does. And I figured I just put a little piece in there and made it a little bit big so that it didn't touch the bottom, and it was kind of a little space between it and the bottom so it would reflect the light.
Yeah, so it's slightly bowed up.
Yes.
And then there's actually a couple of layers in there, but the bottom layer lies flat and then the top layer is bowed, and that causes it to create caustics.
Right. So we had to make sure that there was water also in the water wheel, and I figured we could just cut little tiny squares out and fit them in the, I guess they call them little buckets that's on the water wheel, but something to make it look like there's water in there going around.
And then I thought to paint half of it with a mossy green color so that the vertical edge is clear, but the part at the very bottom is painted, because I didn't want that seam at the bottom of the wheel to show.
Right.
And so the green paint covers up the seam, and I think it looks nice and mossy and gooey down
Oh, it
in
sure
there.
does.
And then just keep the clear material going up the side, which is the side that the water would be rolling off of.
Right. Well, when it's running, I mean, it looks like there's really water in there. It looks great.
Okay, next up, the place where the water is cascading from the Millrace down onto the mill wheel. And there's a technique I've used since I was a kid to do this, where you just take a piece of cellophane tape, stick it to the place where you want the water to roll out, and then brush on some lacquer thinner, and it kind of curls up and looks sort of like water coming out. In HO scale, that works pretty well. I tried it here, and it sort of worked, but it turned out sort of crinkly, so I wasn't completely happy with it. So I thought, well, let's see if I can, perfect the technique. So I took another piece of tape, cut out as accurately as I could to the length, keeping in mind that this has to stop short of the mill wheel because it's a powered mill wheel, and I can't have the mill wheel hitting this thing and causing it to flap up and down, that would look really silly. And then instead of just letting the edges curl up in a sort of random way by painting lacquer thinner on there, I came in with my ruler and forced a crease into the tape right where I wanted it to curl up. And then when I removed the ruler, I had these creased up edges. I also had mostly destroyed the adhesive, except at the top there where I was protecting the adhesive with another ruler. So then where the adhesive was still more or less working, I was able to tack this down to the Millrace and then fold it over, which brought the tape back up to a horizontal position. So I forced everything into place and then added a couple of drops of the very thin super glue to hold everything in place. Then I let the super glue kind of run down into the creases where I'd folded the edges up to help secure that. And it also brings back some of the transparency in the tape and makes it improves the look. You're the one that put me onto that.
Right, I discovered that a long time ago by accident. Years ago, my mom used to protect her jewelry with clear nail polish, and I found it would peel off too quickly, so I started using a little bit of this really super thin crazy glue, if you will, to coat the backs of my rings to keep the gold plate in place and not scratch the ring. But I started using it on other things that you put clear nail polish on and found out that it works, including on things like this.
Yeah, it covers up the scratches and imperfections and just makes it look that much more clear.
Right, you just have to be very careful not to touch it or you'll ruin the effect.
So now that I've got all of the other elements in place, the last thing I need to do is build the little platform out to the ladder that goes up to the walkway over to the sluice gate. I needed to have everything else in place, including the sluice gate and the stairway and the support structures here, before I could figure out exactly where to put that and how to shape it. And here again, since it's being assembled in place, it all needs to be stained as I'm going. I can't build it as a removable element and then stain it, so everything's got to be stained as I'm putting it in place. So here I've got the whole lower trestle, all of the bents taken out so that I can work on this, but from overhead you can see exactly where all this is going to go. So I had to build another stairway. This one's really steep. It's really a ladder more than a stairway, and that will go at the end of that walkway and then go up to the walkway over to the sluice gate. I thought about actually putting railings up here, but I thought, somebody will just have to sort of take their life in their hands when they're going over to work the sluice gate. I think railings would make it look way too visually busy. This was my first attempt at the ladder, and I wasn't happy with it, so I redid it with a much tighter spacing on the steps going up. So here's the reworked ladder. When I was teaching at Brooks Institute, they didn't like us giving out bad grades, but they were perfectly happy with us giving out do-overs. So if you couldn't get a B on your project, you had to do it over and over and over until you brought it up to at least B work. That way we could justify giving people the better grade. And anyway, it's much closer to the real world. Either get it right or do it over. So I did it over, and I'm much happier with the reworked ladder. It looks much better in place. And it looks much more like something the figures here could actually use and climb up to the walkway and walk over to the sluice gate. It's actually, I think, sort of unfortunate that you can barely see the sluice gate, but you can peek your head around and see it. But I did position this light directly above the ladder so that that's really lit up and looks wonderful. And I think that really shows off the ladder, and really nice finished element back there. And speaking of ladders, there needs to be a ladder from the boat dock down to the water level so that somebody that ties up a boat here can actually climb up to the boat dock. I also thought to put some details out here, some barrels on the pier, and some old tires. that they've put out there to protect the wood bents from destruction if a boat is banging up against them. So I just found some old 25th scale model car tires. They're a little small, but they work just fine, and tied those in place with a bit of string. Anyway, we now have a boat dock and a mill race, and we're ready to move on to something else. I thought next week we'll talk about painting, because there's, needless to say, a lot of different painting effects on here.
Right.
So hopefully you'll want to follow along with that. Hopefully you like this video and you'll hit the like button. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
We'll see you then.
We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.